Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Parsha is Lech Lecha. Abraham leaves his homeland and the journey of the Jewish people begins. But what about Abraham was so radical? What about Abraham has created such extremes of love and hate, such rivalry, such animosity, such promise, and such despair? Join us for Abraham and the birth of the Jewish problem. Well, welcome back, Rabbi. I think we said this last week. We were wondering what we were going to talk about this year. And unfortunately, the current events, the feelings in our gut are driving the conversation, making us look at the Torah from a new lens, fortunately or not. And here we go. You know, I was tempted to call this week Abraham and the birth of anti-Semitism. But I was looking at Sartre, who wrote a book that's translated into English as Anti-Semite and Jew, but in French, it's the Jewish problem. And I think just the term, the Jewish problem, it's like, you know, I know what a math problem is. I know what a weight problem is. There are so many self-explanatory problems. But the problem with the Jewish problem is we know it's a problem, but we don't even know how to understand it or to wrap our arms around it. So here we are in a week where poor kids on college campuses are being literally abused. Jews around the world, starting in Israel 2-3 weeks ago, who had a pogrom, but Jews around the world are being ripped back into centuries ago and tropes of this anti-Israel, but it really now the wolf has shown its colors. It's anti-Semitism. So here we are, we're right at the beginning with Abraham, and I thought this would be a good time to try to figure out what it's all about.
I think you're right. If you're going to talk about anti-Semitism, let's see how Abraham managed it from the very beginning.
So I didn't get very far in this week's parsha. I started with the first pasuk. I said the parsha was called Lech Lecha. That's what Abraham is told to do. Now the Lord said unto Abraham, "Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's home unto the land that I will show thee." So even Lech Lecha seems to have like a duality kind of built right into it. Lech is to go. Lecha is whether it's to yourself or to somewhere. There seems to be a tension just in that phrase. And then what struck me this year more than ever was that it mentions the word aretz twice. First it says to leave your land, and then and your father's house, and all that represents, and then it says El haaretz asher arecha. So on the one hand, there's a rejection of a land, of a homeland, and on the other hand, there's this tension of going to another land, and that's kind of what got me started, because so much of what we think in terms of what makes the journey of the Jews so special is that we are the other, that we are, we'll talk in future weeks about Ivri, which literally means, and Abraham was called an Ivri, someone who comes from the other side of the river. Ma'avir goes over. Ivri is also related to a sinner, a veira. So there's definitely, I started by saying what was so radical about Abraham. I think in this one sentence, one gets boiled down to its essence, the radical nature of our journey, but certainly Abraham's journey. What do you read into the pasuk?
Yeah, well, you know, Ivri, that's so interesting that the word Ivri has become the word for Jew. even though obviously that's not what the word means at all. It means from the other side. And I think that is such an important lesson for this week, that somehow the Jew always finds him or herself on the other side. The whole world is on one aver, on one side of the river, and we seem to always be on the other. And we're great because of it, and we suffer because of it.
And I think, again, to focus on how there's a radical nature to being, we talk about Madlik as disruptive Torah. It just seems to come across that Abraham was a disruptor. He left his home. Who leaves their home? And it doesn't, we'll see maybe a little bit later, it doesn't have the obvious end of the journey, which is, and he returned home. He left the home to go somewhere else. Rashi says in the second part, he says, Lech lecha, I shall make known your character throughout the world. V'od she'odia tivacha ba'olam. So again, there's an emphasis here on this was not only a personal radical move, but this was something different, and that Abraham had certain character traits that were different. Rashi makes reference to the Midrash Tanchuma, and the Midrash Tanchuma flushes it out a little bit more. And it says, get thee out of the country. It references a verse in Psalms, and it says, hearken, O daughter, and consider, incline thy ear, forget also thine own people and thy father's house. So shall the king desire thy beauty, for he is thy Lord, and do homage unto him. So the Midrash goes on to say, forget also thine own people and thy father's house refers to the idolaters, concerning whom it is said, who say to a piece of wood, thou art my father. And so shall the king desire by beauty. This is God. So, we've in prior episodes, we've talked about the famous midrash of Abraham destroying his father's idols. But here, it comes back to that theme that when he left with a capital L. He was rejecting. He was rejecting the religion of his forebears. And I think that's why the sense of Ivri, which has to do with someone who does a sin, does an Aveirah, he ultimately rejected the religion of his father. He rejected all that the pagan world standed for, and then he embraced God. So again, you have this Lech Lecha, whether it's moving from one land to another land, or moving from one ideology, religion, belief system to another. I think that gets a little bit into what maybe Rashi means when he says the world will learn about this guy's character. There is this rejection, and it's not blind rejection, it's also acceptance of something else. But the two go hand in hand.
The two, they're just flip sides of the same thing, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that. That's absolutely right.
And again, it really, the way you look at Abraham really says as much about you as it does about him. But, let's go back to my favorite first Rashi in the whole Bible. And there Rashi asks, why does the Bible begin with this story of God creating the world? And very famously, he explains, for should the peoples of the world say to Israel, you are robbers because you took by force the land of the 7 nations of Canaan, Israel may reply to them, all the earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be He. He created it and gave it to whom He pleased. When He willed, He gave it to them. When He willed, He took it from them and gave it to us. So in this Rashi, you can find religious nationalists who will say, here it is. What else do you need to see? People are going to accuse us of stealing this land. And Rashi, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, says, and God gave it to us. And people who believe that the Jewish people are more than just a land, that we didn't just go to a land, we rejected something else, will say, but read it in context. It says God took it from them and he gave it to you because it was at God's discretion. And the end of the sentence is, and he can take it from you and give it to somebody else. So here too, it's in the same, to me, this is almost a reflection on Lech Lecha. This concept of leaving one ideology, an ideology of idolatry where you worship things and maybe even places, and then the other of another vision of a land given by God. But because the Jews have been so accused of either being homeless wanderers who should be, they're punished by God, would be one trope, or when they're back in the land, they're occupiers, they're too strong, it's like you can't win. It seems to me it kind of almost fluctuates between some of the concepts we're looking at here of Lech Lecha, of leaving and coming, of belonging and not belonging.
What about the fact that Lech Lecha me'artzecha, leave your land, but God never tells Abraham where to go?
Well, it says where I will show you, but you're right.
I know, but you don't know where it is. I want to tell you, tomorrow morning, they asked me. They have like a pre-Shabbat podcast or something in the Jewish community in the UAE, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and they asked me tomorrow morning to say the Dvar Torah, and I thought the Dvar Torah I would give them is exactly that. Sometimes you have to trust people. They tell you go to the place that I'll show you. I don't know what that place is, but trust me, it's going to work out. Think of all the people in Dubai, right? They're so far away from everybody, but you just have to trust.
So you're focused, I think, on that leap of faith, Kierkegaard.
Right? Isn't that true?
Yeah. And what is it faith in? It's a little bit of faith in the unknown. And again, I think we might get into this in some of the thinkers that we're going to be exposed to, is that the unknown is a big. If you had to put something at one pole, which is idolatry, and something that is written in stone and is solid and immutable, and the other side of a land that I will show you, which is based on no definition and on faith, those could be the two poles as well. So I'm totally with you. So I want to quote a poem, not a poem really, an essay, a short essay by Chaim Bialik. And Chaim Bialik is a great Jewish Israeli. He's considered one of the forefathers of Jewish literature, of Israel literature. And he was actually quoted numerous times, even by the prime minister this week, who quoted a poem that he wrote called Vengeance, and it was written after a major pogrom.
In Kishinev in 1903. You see, he's just to say before you quote him, just understand, he's very important because he really came to all of this because he witnessed a pogrom in Kishinev in 1903. And not so many people were killed, but, it upset the idea that Jews were comfortable in Russia. After that, the Jews started leaving and he became a Zionist and he moved to Israel. So they look at him now to say, how did he respond? Vengeance to the pogrom.
So that was a different poem, but I just referenced that to show you how core he is. Yeah, and I think it's very, very important that his Lech Lecha journey, if you will, came out of the pogrom that he saw. So I think it's very, very relevant. But the essay, the short little monograph that I want to quote from, is called Jewish Dualism. And he talks about two tendencies. On the one hand, the desire to expand from the center, and the other to contract toward and cleave to it. No nation strives to be swallowed up in other groups as much as the Jews, and at the same time to remain an entity whose least particle is still recognizably Jewish. And he goes on, a group which adopts itself to the ways of life of a whole world, but nevertheless remains people dwelling apart, not reckoned among the nations. I really take this a little bit as a commentary on Lech Lecha, meaning to say that the duality of leaving a land but being a part of the land, of being a part of the world, about being unique. To him, it is the essence of Judaism and of the Jewish journey. And he does reference that, scholars will say that we've left and we've come back multiple times. The first time that we could come back or say we were coming back was with this journey of Abraham. But what he says is that what's different about us is that after wandering for thousands of years and after endless changes and reevaluations, after influencing the whole world and being influenced by it, we are now for the third or fourth time returning to our land. He really focuses on this tension between being a part of the world and being unique. And I feel in my gut somehow, and I talked a little bit about this last week, this concept of loving man in the abstract and loving the person sitting right in front of you and taking care of your family and taking care. The Jews have straddled that. I won't say perfectly because there's a tension there, but he talks about why we're unique. He says it's not that we're the only people that have been exiled, but it's people that have been exiled that when a people leaves and re-enters, that's its inner strength. That we chose not to be expelled, and they come to an end in their land, and there are nations which are exiled and lost in the land of their dispersion. But when a people leaves and re-enters, so he has us going out, being influenced by the world, influencing the world, and then coming back to our homeland. It really resonated with me that it was a Lech Lecha moment, but the truth is that if you look at anti-Semitism, we're hated at both poles. We're hated for being outside of our land, for being wanderers. We are hated for assimilating into other cultures. We're hated for being different from those other cultures, retaining our identity. And then, of course, what we're seeing today is we're hated when we come back to our homeland. The easiest explanation is they just hate us. There's you can't do anything right. The other way of looking at it is they hate us exactly for this reason, that we are somehow straddling between these two concepts. We're not willing to be just universalists, and we're not willing just to be particularists. And I think that's one of the really, really cool things that Bialik points out that really echoes what Rashi said in terms of he can give it, he can take it. We Jews have been refined and ennobled, coming and going, and it's part of our essence.
There's no question that that's true. It is part of our essence. You say coming and going, particular and universal. I mean, I don't know if those are the same things, but of course they achieve the same thing. It shows that the Jew is almost like ambidextrous. We can manage in all different kinds of situations.
So now let's go to some of the authorities or the sources of anti-Semitism. So the first thinker I want to talk about is Friedrich Nietzsche. And what he put his finger on was the Jews are hated because in a sense they gave the world Christianity and morality. This is the way he says it. It was the Jews who, rejecting the aristocratic value equation of good means noble, means powerful, means beautiful, means happy, means blessed, and ventured with awe-inspiring consistency to bring about a reversal, and held it in the teeth of the most unfathomable hatred. He says, only those who suffer are good. This is putting words into Judaism's mouth that it gave to Christianity and therefore the world. So only those who suffer are good, only the poor, the powerless, the lowly are good, the suffering, the deprived, the sick, the ugly are the only pious people, the only ones saved. Salvation is for them alone, whereas you rich, the noble, the powerful, you eternally wicked, cruel, lustful, insatiate, godless, you will be eternally wretched. So it's kind of fascinating that he, I guess you could call him a self-hating Christian, but he blamed Judaism as the source of the Judeo-Christian morality of celebrating that wanderer, of celebrating. Nowhere does it say that Abraham was rich. Nowhere does it say what it normally would say about the founder of a great nation, that he had a great yichus, that he was wealthy, that he was beautiful. All it says about our boy is that he left with nothing besides his family. I find it kind of fascinating that that in Nietzsche, he sees the source of anti-Semitism as blaming, I think, getting back to that Rashi, the unique characteristics of whether it was in Abraham or what we see in Abraham.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. I mean, you can't be surprised that Abraham is the model of Judaism. Now, it is important to note that Abraham technically was not a Jew. The Jewish people only started with Jacob. You know, there are no Jewish people when there's just one person. It is true in the parsha that God makes a promise to Abraham that his descendants will be slaves in a foreign land for 400 years, then they will be saved, and then they will go into the land. But there's no religion yet. It's really just what monotheism represents, right?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, we kind of graft monotheism onto the Bible. I listen to this line of Nietzsche, and then we're going to go to Freud in a second. He says that the Jews are guilty of universalizing the plight of the slave onto all humankind. So he focuses on the slave, and you said that. Abraham was, in the vision last week, was told he would be a slave. He is this wanderer, and the chutzpah to make that into an ideal. I think that's a little bit of what Nietzsche is saying. And the chutzpah of making everyone feel guilty for not being poor, for not being a wanderer, for not being dispossessed. It's a fascinating insight. But let me tell you, I don't know whether Freud was influenced this or not, but all of you who are loyal followers of Madlik know that the last book that Freud wrote was Moses and Monotheism. And in that book, you said a second ago, Rabbi, that Abraham was not technically a Jew. Freud argues that Moses wasn't a Jew either.
Right.
But much more importantly, that we read, and there have to be at least 40 times that the Jews rebelled against against Moses, I should say. Korach is the most pinnacle of it, but they never quite kill him. And Freud thinks that's repressed. And ultimately, according to Freud, they did kill Moses, and they killed him, again, mirroring what Nietzsche said. They killed him because he gave them this damn religion of not being able to worship idols. He gave them an even more spiritualized, imageless form of monotheistic religion. But the crude mass of former slaves could not bear the severe demand of the new faith. In a mob revolt, Moses was killed and the memory of murder repressed. And what he argues, and I think this was his kind of reapproachment with Judaism, was he goes through history and he says basically it was a repressed memory that worked itself out. And that ultimately every Jew has this dual memory of, on the one hand, rejecting, fighting, struggling with this spiritual idea, and on the other hand, struggling with it for being the heir of this as a physical Jew. So he does something different, I believe, and I quote a scholar who talks about the fact that what he sees unique in Freud is, and he writes as follows. The guy's name is Eliza Slaver. He says, here we find contradiction. On the one hand, Judaism is often embraced as an unrepresentable deity, a collection of spiritual, intellectual ideas. On the other hand, Jewishness is often utterly material, a weight which is schlepped around the Jewish bodies go. And in his final book, Freud suggests that Jewishness are not necessarily at odds. Rather, he reveals links between the conceptualization of Judaism as a body of intellectual ideas and as a genealogical chain. So the argument that these make in terms of Freud is what he says is, and I'm translating it now into our parsha, is that ultimately there was this Lech Lecha moment, that Judaism contains these two poles. And what the world would rather have is one pole or the other. And what it could never fathom, what could never wrap its arms around, or to put it in a different way, what was radical about Abraham is the same thing as radical about that first Rashi in the Torah, that it has both. It says, this land was promised to me and this land can be taken away from me. I reject idols, but I believe in something else, in that faith. I think it's that which ultimately is what, it's this duality that the world cannot accept because it's so challenging. I really found this in Sartre. And Sartre, first of all, has a very wonderful phrase that says, if the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him. That's a famous one. Thing. But what he is saying by that is how one sees the Jew defines you more than it defines the Jew. And I'm going to just stop for a second. I'd love to hear your comments before we dive into what Sartre does say is the Jew that so strongly then creates this need to define oneself vis-a-vis the Jew.
Yeah, so let's start with, if the Jew did not exist, the anti-Semite would invent him. Now, is that itself an anti-Semitic comment?
I think what he's going to try to say, and I'm going to jump to the end story before I go into Sartre. I've been thinking about it recently. I've been thinking about why the Arab street is so up in arms. I've been thinking about, we think of anti-Semitism so much more with Christianity than we do with Islam. But we are being really exposed to a very deep anti-Semitism, because you can't call it anything else in terms of the Hamas charter and from the shouting in the streets. And here's my question to you, Rabbi. How do we define the Palestinian people? How are the people of the streets permitted in the totalitarian regimes to express themselves? All they can do is be anti-Jewish and anti-Israel. And in a sense, aren't they defining themselves? I thought in terms of those people that say that the totalitarian Arab regimes, they use hatred of Israel as a vent, as a way of letting their people go out, and for everything that they're hating and that they're not happy with, rather than turn that to King Hussein and rather than turn that to Sisi, they can release it against the Jews. And so, in a sense, are they not defining themselves by how they're looking at the Jews? And from a political sense, could you almost say, if the Jews did not exist, the Arab world would have to invent him?
So on that note, It is. It's. I don't know if it's anti-Semitic, but it reflects a negativity. It reflects the fact that they need to hate us, and therefore, if we weren't there, they would have to create us. Because you can never blame yourself. You always blame the other guy, and if the other guy happens to be your enemy, it's even more convenient to blame the other guy.
So here's how Sartre drills down. He's a brilliant thinker. He says the anti-Semite has chosen hate because hate is a faith. He has escaped responsibility and doubt. He can blame anything on the Jew. He does not need to engage reason, for he has his faith. Anti-Semitism is a way of feeling good, proud even, rather than guilty at the abandonment of responsibility and the flight before the impossibility of true sincerity. The anti-Semite abandons himself to the crowd and his bad faith. He flees responsibility as he flees his own consciousness, and choosing for his personality the permanence of the rock, kind of like Avodah Zorah, he chooses for his morality the scale of petrified values. Anti-Semitism, in short, is the fear of the human condition. So what Sartre does is, and I'm going to translate it back into our parsha, if Lech Lecha is this duality, if Lech Lecha is the ability to have faith in the same time as not knowing where one's going or what's expected of you, of being able to harbor at the same time a loyalty, a passion for a land, and the sense that you are ultimately always leaving a land, it is the anti-Semite who rejects all that threatens everything that they believe in. I think that Sartre has an amazing insight. And so much of it, I think, rings true not only for the Arab street, but again, for the people that I was discussing last week who love humanity in its abstract, but can't give individual human being the respect and honor that they deserve. I read these words about the smugness of the faith, that this hate as a faith, and so much of it rings true to what we're having, and so much of it rings true to the situation we Jews are going through right now, which is really Lech Lecha. Are we coming or are we going? Is this progress or are we going backwards? Do we belong or are we being taken away? It really it really ties me in to at least one way of looking at Abraham and the journey that he embarked on.
I think that these sources are right to the point. I'll just add my little piece, and that is, and it also reminds you, Lech Lecha, go and trust me. And it's hard to trust me when you don't know what the future holds. You talk about. I was listening today. They were interviewing someone from Nefesh B'Nefesh, which is the organization that helps people make Aliyah, and they were talking about the lone soldiers. And the fact that the lone soldiers come to Israel with a tremendous enthusiasm for protecting the land, protecting the people, and they go by themselves to fight, to fight for the people. And it's harder when you're not sure what that future holds. You fight to maintain it. But that's, we have to go back to Avraham, to the very, very first story, that we need a lot of trust in God, the fact that everything is going to work out in the end.
Amen. Amen. I think the lone soldier, the one person or people that have really struck me is it's hard to realize that so many of these kibbutzim were really idealistic kibbutzim. This couple that was kidnapped and she was released, he used to go to the Gaza border to help bring Palestinians that needed to go to the hospital. I mean, they really struck the best.
I know that. This guy Katzman, who was killed, he was a big peace activist. He was active. He worked hard. They worked hard for what they believed in. They were very idealistic.
A human life is a human life, but it really exposes the the tragedy of it all, and I think also the different cultures. And maybe this is a culture war at the end of the day. But we have our Torah, we have our tradition. Abraham began a journey which we continue walking in, and we will survive.
We will survive. On that note, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Please God, next week we should have better news for everybody, but we will continue learning. Shabbat Shalom.
So with that, I bid you all a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you all next week.